more will come to humanity. Actually, I'm talking about 1992, and now we are 2009. This person, he adjusted his views. And the last article he published last September, October, about the collapse of the America, the institution, or the company, as he called it, where he make a kind of, no, this is not the end of history. But still, the idea that I want to reach, however, in his book, he adds that the only part of the world which has not adopted the secular human view is the Islamic world, and proposes that there will be a conflict in terms of this ideology in the Islamic world. I believe, yes, we have such a problem now in the Islamic world, that people who are affected by the liberal view, they are trying to bring something, but that causes some conflicts in our societies. Now, one of the topics of contention between these two worldviews, and as you know, if you have a theory here and a theory here, each theory gives you multi-systems. I mean, the economical system of the liberal view, you have the capitalism. And according to Islam, you will have the Islamic finance system. You will have the social system here and the social system here. You will have the political system here, the political system here. You have to look deeply. So one of the topics of contention between these two worldviews concern women. What is the position and status of women? How are women looked to? Are women elevated in one culture and oppressed in another? For sure, the Western view says that women are only elevated in the Western societies. But contrary to that, the Muslim says, no, the true, that the freedom that men and women talk about in the West, it's not more than they are deceived by this idea, and there is no freedom, and it is really does not exist. So, in order to talk about this topic, we have to move into the liberal view first. How it was developed. We know that the Western tradition sees itself as the intellectual inheritance of the Greek tradition that existed before the Prophet Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, and so therefore many of the intellectual traditions of the West are found in some degree in the writings of the early Greek philosophers like Aristotle, Plato, and so forth. But how Aristotle, for example, how did he look at women? What are the ideas of the Greek philosophers? You will find that Aristotle in his writings argued that women were not full human beings, and that the nature of woman was not that of a full human person. He firmly believed and preached that women were unfinished men. As a result, women were by nature deficient, not to be trusted and to be looked down upon. Still now, if I want to study the metaphors, for example, I have to go to Aristotle and his views. I started with his views. But this is the view about the womb. In fact, writings describe that free women in many aspects of the Greek society, except for the very few women of the elite classes, had positions no better than animals and slaves at that time. Now, this Aristotelian view of women was later carried on to the early Christian tradition of the Catholic Church. And you'll find that St. Thomas Aquinas, the 13th century Christian theologian, said that woman was created to be man's helpmate, but her unique role is in conception. Since for other purposes, men would be better assisted by other men. He added in his writings, proposed that women were the trap of Satan, or the shaitan. The issue of Adam and Eve added a dimension to the earlier Greek ideas of Aristotle. And what I mean by that, if you read in the Old Testament, the story of Adam and Eve, in Genesis 3, verses 6 to 17, you will find the story of Adam and Eve that we're all familiar about. I'm not asking you to read all of this, but look at the pronouns that I highlighted already. You will find that it talks about the woman, she, the woman, she, and all they speak about the woman. Women, by this verse, or these verses, were the cause of the downfall of man, and therefore were Satan trapped and should be looked at that caution, with caution and weaknesses, because they caused the first downfall of humanity, and all thus evil proceeds from women. This type of thought was persistent within the writings of the church fathers throughout the Middle Ages. In their writings, we find that this theme proposed in one aspect or another. However, after the Protestant Reformation, Europe decided to free itself from the shackles of chains of the Catholic Church, and ideas which have been entitled in the Age of Enlightenment or thought of as such caused them to feel that they needed to free themselves from many of these ideas. For sure, some of these ideas were scientific in nature. As you know, they were talking about the earth goes around the sun instead of the sun going around the earth. Theological in nature, as in the writings of Martin Luther, and also social in nature, like the position of women in society. However, the writers of the Enlightenment still carried this basic theme that was not much a switch. Women were not fully human beings. And if you want to see what Martin Luther himself believed, that women have strong sexual urges than men, and that if a man is impotent, should supply a sex partner for his wife. He thought that women were inferior to men and were created to be ruled by men. As proof, he cited the shape of a woman's hips. Its broad base indicates that God meant for them to sit at home. When you move on into the French writers, during the Revolution, like Rousseau, Voltaire, and others, they looked at women as a burden that needed to be taken care of. This is why one could believe that it's Rousseau in his book Emily, which he wrote concerning the education of women, proposed a different form of education for women, based upon the fact that women were unable to understand what men were able to understand. This is the tradition that the West inherited, and thereafter we find in the 18th. The first writing appeared by women and some men calling for the change of these ideas. So one of the first books written is The Vindication for the Rights of Women in 1792. And Margaret Fuller, she argued that the individuals had unlimited capacities, and that when people's roles were defined according to their sex, human development was severely limited. I don't know if you agree with her or not. I myself have put big question mark on this argument. Thereafter, the tradition of women receiving certain rights came. The first of these were basically legal rights, because until the 18th, women were not able to own property, were not able to dispose of their wealth as men did. It's very well known that the first laws that allowed women to own property in the United States or in Europe appeared only in the last 3 decades of the 18th. Women in the Industrial Revolution, especially in England, were forced to labor for many hours in the coal mines and so forth, and would receive no pay whatsoever compared to men. So thereafter, the first calling of the movement was that people who work